Okay, today we're doing a little bit of a tutorial on camera shake without using cinemachine or any add-ons, or without hand animating your camera actually shaking. In this tutorial, we are going to make a little bit of a script, and I will show you what it does. It takes care of both moving and rotational shake. So if I set the rot speed to 0, you can see it just changing positions. And if I increase the rotation speed, it also includes uh, rotating as part of the shake for camera shake. Obviously, I have it pretty exaggerated here. You can turn down the intensity by reducing the maximum dimensions that you can have, or I guess reducing the amount of dimensions that you allow your camera to shake in. It'll all make sense here in a second. So, for those of you who just want to copy and paste and don't want to watch the whole video, the way this works is this capsule has a event on it which corresponds to a script on the capsule or on the object that has the animator called capsule anim events, and I just made up this quick script. It just contains this void. And this void triggers the camera shake to begin. So we'll start at the bottom. This is the meat of the shake. The shakiness, yes, that's a good way. So this void takes care of doing the actual shaking during update. This one is what starts it, and it's the same one that the capsule anim events script accesses. And then this is called at the start, and it generates the shake points. So the positions and the rotations that the camera goes to. Here's the start and update. As you can see, start just generates the shake points, and the update checks to see if the camera is shaking, which you will see the variables here in a second, and you'll be able to copy those. I like doing things backwards sometimes. And then this takes care of resetting it back to normal once you have finished the shake time. And here are the variables. So I'll show them in order without saying anything. And you can pause to copy and paste. Okay, for the rest of you, I am going to do a little bit of a walkthrough. So I'll show you every point of the process that I took. First, we have a capsule, and I'm not going to show you how to animate it, but I will show you how to set up the animation event. So I am going to remove the capsule event script, because we'll be creating that in the walkthrough. And I will also remove the camera shake script from the empty. So you start by taking your main camera or your scene's camera, whatever it is, and you make sure that it is a child of an empty object. So I guess I'll delete that. Show you 100% of the process. So right click, create empty, and this will be the main camera parent. And I'm gonna first start by making it a child of the main camera, resetting its transform, and then actually making the main camera a child of it. So now the main camera can be moved around in local space. If you try to do this script while the camera is in world space, as in it's not a child of anything, then it will sort of teleport straight to the world center and wiggle around there instead of wherever you want it to wiggle around. So we make it a child of an empty object. And then once we have our empty object, we're going to add a component, new script, and we're going to name the script camera shake of death, because why not? Then we create our Butamus script, and we're going to keep our start and update functions. But let's start making some variables. So I will do a slightly simplified version of the earlier script that just creates the positions and has the camera move to those positions. Every time you restart the game, it'll generate new positions, but you can sort of control the vague area that it'll generate points that the camera will move to. So we're going to start by making a vector3 array, or actually I think it's easier to make lists. So list vector3 and name it, and this will be our target points. So I'll just call it targ points, or it's not points, it's actually just positions, so I'll call it tar pose. And we'll set that equal to a new list vector3. Next, we are going to need a index so that we know which one of the tar poses we want the camera to be moving towards. So we'll make an integer and we'll call it tar index, or tar in. I'll call it tar index. And we are going to need a void to generate all of the vector3 positions. I suppose if you wanted it to repeat the exact same positions every time, you would make this a public list, like that, and then you'd have access to it in the inspector, and you could just manually put in the order of the points you want it to go in. But for now, we'll just do a randomly generated set of points. So I'm going to go back and put it back like that. Then let's create a float, public float, and this will be our shake time. So how long do we want to be shaking the camera for? And one more float, shake speed. The computer knows what you're going to say. It reads your mind. Okay. Next, I'm going to create a void, and this will be generate shake points. And we're going to make another void called void, and we're going to want this one to be public actually. Start shaking. And finally, we are going to make a private void. You don't have to type private, but as long as you just leave it blank in front of the void, it'll assume that it's private. You can make it public if you want. Doesn't really change anything. Void actually shake. Okay, so generate shake points is something we want to have happen at the very beginning. So we'll put it in the start function. And in here, we are going to make a for loop. And we are going to say for, and actually we're going to need another integer. Int tar pose length. So this will, and we'll just set it to like 10. You can set this to whatever you want. You can add it as a public variable if you want, and then you can change it from the inspector. Basically, the bigger this number is, the more points your list will have to choose from, or you'll run through more points before you repeat and do the same movement over and over again. So for right now, I'm going to keep it as a private and just set it to 10 because it doesn't really matter that much. Now we're going to say for, in parentheses, integer I is equal 0, and I is less than tar pose length, and I++. Exactly what we want. Basically, we create a private variable specific to this void, and every time we complete the code that's inside of these parentheses, it'll make I get slightly larger. And then as I is less than tar pose length, it'll keep doing that until I becomes equal to or greater than tar pose length. So what do we want to put in here? We want to put vector 3 temp, because this is just a temporary vector 3, and we want it to generate some random values. So we're going to want to create some variables so that we control what values we actually want to generate. First thing is first, we're going to make a public float, and we will call this vertical or I guess I like to call it x, y, z, what is y. So this would be max y pose, and of course the minimum. And of course we don't really, yeah, that's fine, that's fine. And next we're going to do public float max x pose, because x is, let me show you in the game view. As you change the x position, it'll move side to side. Of course, that's the world position, so we can't actually see it. Z always points forward, x is side to side, and y is up and down. So we say x pose and public float min x pose. And if you want to, you can create a Z pose as well, and that'll move the camera forwards and backwards. I don't really like that, so I am going to abstain from doing that. So when we generate our vector 3 temporary position, point, whatever, we are going to say, actually I did this wrong. We are going to say float. We're going to make a temporary float y pose. That's going to equal random dot range parentheses, and I'm sure you already guessed what we're going to put in here. The min y pose, comma, and the max y pose. Then we're going to basically do the same thing for the x. And then finally, we can say vector 3 temp is going to equal new vector 3 x pose, y pose, and then I just have 0 because we don't want to move forwards and backwards. And finally, we say tar pose dot add parentheses temp end parentheses and semicolon. Beautiful. Now it should generate a bunch of random points within our specified distances. So if we go back to the scene and take a look-sees at the inspector, and actually, before we do that, I'm going to set the list to public just so I can show what's going on here in the inspector. Let's set our mins and maxes. So I'm going to say 0.1 and negative 0.1 for all of them, as in 0.1 for the maxes and negative 0.1 for the minimums. And then once we hit play, we can see that we have lots of randomly generated points. Okay, I'm going to make the list being private again because we don't really need it public. And now we want to work on these other two voids. We have start shaking and actually shake. And we'll start by going to the update and typing in if parentheses, oh, we're going to need a Boolean, actually. We're going to need a couple more variables. First, private Boolean called is shaking. By default, it's going to be false. And what else? We already have shake time. We're going to need a private float called current shake time. Next, I'm going to go into the start, and I'm going to say current shake time equals shake time. Perfect. And then in the update method, I'm going to start by saying if is shaking. We are going to start subtracting current shake time minus equals time delta time. Next, I'm going to create an if statement. So if current shake time is greater than 0, and we are still shaking, then we want to do what? We want to actually shake. Perfect. But if the current shake time is less than or equal to 0, so we'll just say else, is shaking is going to equal false. And so if is shaking is false, so we're going to say else. We are going to do what? We want the camera to return to the center point. So we'll say, oh, we haven't made a reference to our camera. So let's make a reference to our camera. Public transform, because we're going to be manipulating its position. Cam 1 is our camera. And do we already have shake speed? Yes, we do. So we'll say if is shaking, blah, 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 else cam1 dot position, local position, not normal position. You gotta make sure to set it to local position. Cam1 dot local position is equal to what? Vector3 dot lerp. Cam1 dot local position and vector3 dot 0, and then we want to specify how fast that's going to happen. So that speed is going to be our shake speed times time delta time. Next, let's do this start shaking function, and all we need to put here is shaking is equal to true. And now the meat of the script, actually shake. So we are going to want one more variable for this. A public float round dist. So this stands for round distance. Basically, as the camera moves closer to the desired point, once it reaches a certain distance away from that point, as in the round dist, it will change indexes and move on to the next point. And I have found that a pretty good number for the round distance is equal to 0.01f. So public float round dist is equal to 0.01f. Now, in the actually shake function, we can start by getting the current distance. So float current dist is equal to vector3, I believe, dot distance. And now we need our two positions. So we'll say our camera, or cam1, dot local position, and what? We want it to be our tar poses. So the tar pose that we are currently heading towards. Tar pose, square brackets, and then we want tar pose index, or tar index. Now, if we are close, so if current dist is less than or equal to round dist, then we want to say tar index plus plus, and one more if statement, if parentheses tar index is greater than or equal to tar pose length, then we want to set tar index to 0. If tar index is greater than or equal to tar pose length, no. Yes? No? I guess we could say tar pose length, but just in case, I'm going to say tar pose dot count. So that way it gets the count of the actual list, not the thing we used at the beginning. Then we want to basically reset and restart the cycle, so we set tar index equal to 0. Once we have the index all figured out, we are basically going to use the same function as we did here in the update method. So I'm literally just going to steal this and paste it down here. But instead of saying vector 3.0, we're going to say tar pose square brackets tar index. So that will be the current position that we want to be heading towards. Now I believe that that is all we need to do for this script. So we'll let it compile. And really quick, right here, oh, let's delete that. On the capsule, I have a bit of an animation set up where it just jumps off the cliff. And when it impacts the ground, that is when I want my camera shake of death script to be triggered. Oh, and really quick before we forget, we're going to put the main camera in the cam 1 position. And shake time, we'll have it as 1 second for right now, and shake speed needs to be pretty high, so we'll try 50. Next, let's go back to our animation. So let's go to the point where our capsule hits the ground, which is right about there. We're going to add an event. And you'll notice that when we add an animation event, we need to select a new function. But we have no options for the functions we can choose. And that is because we have no scripts on here, no components that actually have any public voids to pick from. So really quick, we're going to make one more quick script, and it will be called anim event receiver. Create an ad, and literally all this script will do, we're going to delete the start and update, is it will be a public void begin what? Begin the cam shake. Begin cam shake. And we're going to need a reference to our camera shake script, so we'll say public camera shake of death. Pretty easy to find with that name. We'll call it CS. CSGO. No. And then in the begin camera shake function, we can type in CS dot start shaking. Save that bad boy. Come back to the scene, and we are going to want to drag in our main camera parent to the CS slot, which will automatically assign the script that was attached to the main camera parent, main camera shake of death. Now is the moment of truth. Let's hit play and see what happens. Nothing. And that is because we did not specify in the event. So we come back to our animation tab, come to our event that we just added, go to the function, and select begin camera shake. If you have this attached to like a player, then it'll probably be a lot bigger of a list here. But since we only have one script, it's very easy to find. Look at that. What is going on? So it should be repeating, but obviously it is not. Shake time is 1 second. Oh, I bet I know what we forgot something. We forgot one thing. And that is when the camera shake stops, we need to reset the current current time. What did I call it? Current shake time. So right here when we say if is shaking, blah blah blah, if current shake is greater than 0, blah blah blah, else is shaking is equal to false, as in we have stopped shaking. And we say current shake time is now equal to shake time. And that will reset all of that stuff. So let's hit play. And now is the real moment of truth. So it shakes for a second, because we have it set to a second. And we can modify this during runtime, so I can set it to half a second. Bonk. Or even a quarter of a second. You can also adjust the shake speed, so I can set it to 1,000, make it really fast. Or we can make it pretty slow, go like 10, and then it's a pretty subtle thing. The only thing you can't really change during runtime here is the max Y pose, the min Y pose, the max X pose, and the min X pose, because these things are only used during the start. So if you stop and then adjust these, and then hit play again, so I'll set it to like to this one to -3, and then we hit play, it'll start shaking more down than any other direction. And there you go. That is it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you later.